Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, moni muli wanji, namaste, jambo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jedley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast, an iHeartRadio Best Kids and Family Podcast Award nominee. We are coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We're so delighted and grateful that you are joining us in our mission to help families grow closer through reading. Please be sure to subscribe to the show in the iHeartRadio app, on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Spotify, Amazon Music, wherever you find your podcast. Our guest today is Julian Reeve. He is here to celebrate Captain Perfection and the secret of self-compassion. Before we invite Julian into the studio, we want to make sure that you know all about our special series, our special Earth Day related series called Protecting the Planet with Your Kids. Alexia Brown and I are interviewing authors of fantastic books, authors who can tell parents how we can talk to our kids about climate change in a way that doesn't frighten them, and how we can inspire them to come together and take action to protect our beautiful planet. We're publishing them on Thursdays in April and May. It's Protecting the Planet with Your Kids. You can go to our special web page, protectingtheplanetwithyourkids.com. Join us right now in beautiful Southern California. Our guest today is here to celebrate Captain Perfection and the secret of self-compassion. Please welcome to the show, Julian Reeve. Julian, how are you?
Very well, sir. Thank you for having me.
I'm excited to have you on. I have to tell you, I cannot in any way relate to Captain Perfection because no one has ever in my life accused me of being a perfectionist.
Okay. Well, some might say you're one of the lucky ones, right?
Well, I mean, I don't think people meant that as a compliment. So why don't you tell us about the book?
Sure. So ostensibly, Captain Perfection and the Secret of Self-Compassion is the book that I arguably could have read or should have read when I was a child. I've been a perfectionist all my life, and because I was born when I was born, which was 1974, I was born into a perfectionistic family that had no idea that they were perfectionistic. So both of my parents were perfectionists, didn't realize it. They certainly didn't realize that they were bringing up a perfectionistic child. And that's largely because research and writing about perfectionism didn't kind of really kick in until the early 1990s. So I was kind of in the dark about my perfectionism in terms of how badly it was affecting me for a very long time. The adaptive side, the positive side of perfectionism has helped me greatly in my career and kind of got me to the top of my field as a music director, where I was the music director for Hamilton, the Broadway musical, on its first national tour of the US. And actually, it was just after one of those performances in San Francisco where I suffered a heart attack. And that heart attack perfectionism proved to be the underlying cause. Basically, I had spent a lot of my 20s and 30s feeling I was very low on self-esteem. My inner critic was omnipresent and very loud. And I made some, shall we just label them as dubious lifestyle choices for decades, to try and, suppress those feelings, largely unsuccessfully. So the damage I did to myself actually, caused the heart attack, which then created this, long and rewarding journey into, researching perfectionism and to, try and do some good in the world and try and educate people so that they don't have to go through a similar experience.
Now, I'm hearing because I have the superpower of being able to hear what my listeners are thinking as they're going to listen to this months from now. But I'm guessing that there are some people out there thinking, Wow, Julian was a real successful guy. He probably never would have made it to be music director of that national tour of Hamilton if he didn't have that perfectionism in his life. And wasn't that worth it?
Yes, and the key with perfectionism in general is to always remember to regard it as being a multi-dimensional thing to look at. And what I mean by that is, so psychologists they're not kind of undecided on exactly what perfectionism is, but there are many different ways to describe it. And kind of the easiest way that I've kind of got my head around it is to think about perfectionism as both good and bad. So we have the good side is adaptive perfectionism, and the bad side is maladaptive. So what you're talking about, Jed, is kind of all the adaptive stuff, all the conscientiousness, the fact that I'm very happy to work my tail off for hours on end to make sure that, what I'm delivering is of the highest standards. And you're quite right in saying that without my adaptive perfectionism, I don't think I would have got the job that I had on Hamilton. What's important to remember, though, and this is certainly important for parents who might be identifying perfectionistic traits in their children, that whilst adaptive behaviour is great, it often comes with maladaptive thoughts and behaviours, which can be incredibly damaging. So the key is knowledge, and the key is balance. And the knowledge part simply comes, about how can we manage our traits in healthier ways. And then we can find the balance. And that's exactly what the book tries to achieve for kids. It introduces children to something called self-compassion, which is proven to regulate our experiences with depression, which perfectionism is closely associated with. So I very much kind of fuel the thought that kids can build their own self-compassion superpower, to kind of almost use, well, not almost, exactly use when perfectionism strikes, so that they can find a good balance between the adaptive and maladaptive sides.
What kind of signs? You were mentioning that parents might be able to identify some signs in their kids that will give them a clue that their kids might be going down this perfectionist road that's not healthy. What kind of signs should parents be aware of?
Yeah, I mean, the obvious one is where mistakes are unacceptable. I'm sure every parent can relate to their child, in the middle of an art project or something, throwing themselves to the floor in a tantrum, and the world has ended because there's one tiny mistake that probably no one else would have noticed. That's an obvious one. There's kind of numerous signals. So low self-esteem is a big one. If your child is struggling with confidence, quick to put themselves down, self-deprecation is another one. Another one to look out for is when they can't celebrate when they've done well. So perfectionists are always on to the next thing. So, and they find it very difficult to actually connect with the win. So, if your child comes home with a glowing scorecard for all of their academic results, and they're like, well, it was fine. There's every chance that there's a little bit of perfectionism in there because they're not able to celebrate the results that they're achieving. Fear of failure is another big one. Perfectionists love to live in the future. It's the what if. They're not very able to live in the present. All or nothing thinking, again, is a classic perfectionistic behavior where, a child will go, either it's perfect or it's worthless. There's nothing in the middle. And one that I'm absolutely guilty of myself is the thinking that there's only one way to do things. So you might notice this in problem solving with your child. If you as an adult can see that there's perhaps obviously 3 or 4 routes to the solution for any particular problem, but your child can only see one and fully commits to that and isn't open to the suggestion of option 2, 3 or 4, then again, that's perfectionistic behavior you can look out for.
As you're speaking, I'm curious. Do you think, or do psychologists have an idea that perfectionism, is it nature or nurture? Is it something that kids are born with, or is there things that we do as parents that kind of push them in that direction?
So perfectionism is both a genetic thing that we can pass down, but it's also a learned behavior. And so there's not much we can do about the genes, but there's plenty we can do about the learned behavior. And the learned behavior really starts with us as parents. You know, it's being super aware of, you know, the pressures that we're putting on our kids to produce results. And it's also, I think one of the biggest success stories, I've heard with parents who've managed to get their kids into a healthy place with perfectionism, simply comes from the parents' ability to be authentic and to be vulnerable with their child about their own perfectionism. So if you know that you're a perfectionist, there's a very high chance that your child is too. And so, you know, simply connecting with them in a way that, you know, ostensibly puts a few cracks in your armor as an adult, as a parent, as someone that your child lives up to and probably idolizes, goes a long way in actually persuading your child that actually they don't have to be perfect in order to be like you or to gain the love that they want.
Mm-hmm. That's one piece of advice that I share with young parents who come and ask me. It's let your kids be vulnerable. Let your kids know right away that you don't belong in that pedestal that they've put you up on, that you do make mistakes, that
right.
You don't, you know, one of the best things that the best ways that you can answer a lot of questions is, I don't know. Let's find out together.
Yeah, I love that approach. It was, you know, in hindsight, my own perfectionism was born out of the relationship with my mother. So my mother was my first ever piano teacher. She was a phenomenally gifted pianist. And she started teaching me the piano when I was 4. Subconsciously, what was happening was that every mistake that I made in my head gave my mother opportunity to love me less. That's where my perfectionism came from. And so I didn't obviously want to forego any love from my own mother, so I didn't make any mistakes, and I got very angry when I did make mistakes. Now, had my mother known that she was a perfectionist, and had she developed her own understanding of her own issues, and also developed a language that you know was kinder to her, but therefore kinder to me, using your type of approach would have been absolutely brilliant. Because I would have seen that my mother wasn't, you know, your example of pedestal is absolutely right. That's what kids do. That's certainly what perfectionistic kids do. So, you know, putting a few cracks in the armor, you know, kinks in the chain, however you want to describe it, is actually really important. And I love your approach in terms of let's find out together. You know, let's get in on the journey, because one of the bigger things that I try and get across to perfectionists, and this isn't just kids, this is applicable across the board, is that we're so focused as perfectionists on the result that actually it's partly that thinking that needs to change in order for us to get a healthier approach to it. So I really encourage, and this is a journey I went through after the heart attack, because I was, you know, charged with, I still had to go back to work. So I was charged with having to manage, you know, the biggest musical on the planet at the time, which was right in its heart of its success. So it was a high-powered, high-pressured job, and I had to figure out my perfectionism. And one of the bigger things that I found really helpful was to value the experience of getting to the result as much, if not more, than the result itself. And what I now do is, rather than kind of aim for the result, if you imagine a result is directly in front of you, rather than drawing a direct line from you to the result, what I now try and do is approach the result from around it. So if you imagine your right arm and left arm are actually doing a circular motion to meet in front of you, that's the experience to the result. And I now denote perfection having been achieved in everything that I do by the experience of getting to the result, not the result itself. And simply that approach helps me, gives me a much broader concept, an outlook of how I got to the result. And because of that, the result is often more fulfilling. And all of that is completely applicable to children too. So it's that celebration of how you get to the piece being correct, or the A plus, or the whatever that piece of perfection or success means.
Yeah. One of the things I taught my kids, and it was something that I discovered in myself, was the whole the benefits of becoming comfortable being uncomfortable. I don't know if that makes sense. Just understanding that there are times in life when you're not in control, and that you're outside of your comfort zone. And, maybe if you're on the elliptical machine, it's because you're drenched with sweat, and some people would want to change. But no, just keep going and working hard at it. As a musician, it might be that you're trying, a new scale or a new riff that isn't comfortable, that you're not comfortable with. But, in trying it and in expanding and getting outside that comfort zone, you go on a journey that's really rewarding and fulfilling for yourself.
Absolutely. And again, I love that approach. And it's something that I really wish I could have utilized much earlier in my life. I love that because, again, it comes back down to the results thing. We're so results driven. We're not experience driven. And the idea of being uncomfortable in something, I mean, even as you said the word, something physical happened to me as a perfectionist. Wait, what? You want me to feel uncomfortable? No. I can't. And of course I feel uncomfortable every day. We all do. But actually getting comfortable with uncomfortability, is actually a really powerful tool to have, I think. If you're able to put that into your arsenal, it gets you beyond, it will certainly go a long way to fixing or getting you comfortable with your perfectionism. I mean, this conversation would have been perfect when I was 20, for example. One of the things that musicians have to do is sight read, where we're asked to play music from sight. We have never seen it before, and the whole idea is that you're given something, you're expected to play it. As a perfectionist, I hated sight reading because I had no preparation time. I wasn't in control of the outcome outside of what was going to happen in the moment. And because of that, I used to approach that with fear. And that fear would make me arguably perform even worse because I was tense, I wasn't breathing properly, etc., etc. Had I been taught the power of actually leaning into that uncomfortability, then, and practiced it, and I think that's key, is that, the only way we get comfortable with anything, including being uncomfortable, is to practice being in that situation. So we have to commit to it, and we have to be okay with the fact that it feels really not very good for a while. It's not going to be something that you try twice and you're suddenly sorted. This is going to be ongoing process. No, I love that. I think that's really smart and a great thing for kids to get in their tool belt early on.
Yeah. As you're speaking, we encourage families to continue reading with their kids, long past the time where they're cuddled up on your lap on the couch. And I think this is the perfect book for families to read or co-read together. But I also think, as you're speaking, I think that this might be one of those books that parents could feel challenged reading because, as you were saying, in some ways, this perfectionism is genetic or it's passed down. So a kid who's, being a perfectionist in a really bad way, may be seeing that from their parents, and sitting down and reading this book might be difficult for a parent who is a perfectionist, but it might just be the thing that they need just as much as their kids.
Absolutely, and that's very much the kind of consensus in the reviews. Yes, it is a kid's book, ideally, kind of pitched at kids aged 6 to 12, but adults get as much value out of this as anybody, because the message is, let's use self-compassion to actually help our perfectionism. And there have been some, wonderful. I've received a lovely email a couple of weeks back from a guy who'd read it with his 2 daughters and son and his wife. And he said, they now have a family mantra that is, or a family question, what would Captain Perfection do whenever they come up against perfectionistic issues? And I love that. Mm-hmm. I love the fact that they're on the journey together. I love the fact that the parents have been open enough to embrace, the fact that maybe the issues do start with them as opposed to just their child. The biggest issue, it's not really an issue, but let's call it a challenge that I find with this, is largely perfectionists don't want to change. Perfectionists value their perfectionism, so they don't want to screw with it. And as a result, I strongly believe that society has got the messaging of perfectionism wrong. I understand why it's happened, as in, it's so closely associated with anxiety and depression and burnout, suicide and all those things, that of course we must read the article headlines that says, overcome your toxic perfectionism now. But, we have to accept that perfectionists don't aspire to that way of thinking, and they certainly don't gravitate to those types of headlines to then want to do something about their perfectionism, because their fixed mindset actually keeps them in the process of believing that it actually serves them in some way. Mm-hmm. So we have to change the message, and bringing it back to how parents can do that with their kids is to realize themselves that again, as I explained, there are a good side and bad side to perfectionism. It's not just one thing. And so a little bit of digging, particularly through books like this, will actually give you that language to then be able to kind of almost hone your perfectionism. And this is what I do in business. Perfectionistic employees, we figure out which part of the perfectionism they're comfortable with and they actually want to keep hold of, and maximize the opportunity that perfectionism offers by minimizing everything else, by trying to get rid of it. And there are all sorts of techniques that we can do to achieve that, self-compassion being the main one. So it really is a kind of global message that if parents are kind of brave enough to get into the weeds, there are considerable benefits in doing so.
Yeah. I like that email that you received, and the family now they're asking themselves, what would Captain Perfection do in this moment? Can you give us an example? Maybe the family's working on some kind of project. It's not coming together the way that they want it. They're perfectionists. They're getting angry. They're getting frustrated. The child is just about to throw the hammer and give up on everything. At that moment, what would Captain Perfection say?
Well, super interesting. I think at that moment, so for parents, let's take the family away and let's just keep with the child. Mm-hmm. And so the child's doing an art project and he's made a mistake and he's thrown the hammer and chaos is ensuing. What would Captain Perfection say to a parent? Well, he would say that remember at that moment, your child is in the middle of a perfectionistic episode, which means they're not going to respond to any form of rational argument. Mm. So phrases like, well, it looks great to me, or, well, you tried your best and that's good enough. None of that is going to land because they're in the moment. So it's super important for parents to understand that they're not going to achieve much in the moment other than just get in there and experience it with them. Mm. Do what you do, as in all great parents understand, what their kids need to a degree in terms of how to calm them down, physical touch, soothing words, whatever that is. Later on, you can treat it as a teaching experience. So you can talk to them about why it happened. And you can talk to them, get them to connect with the physical aspects of what happened. Ideally, you want to try and instill enough thought that then becomes language so that they can start to realize when they're having these episodes. And it takes time, but it is achievable. And so, get them into the weeds of, well, what did it feel like? And they might say it's a stomach ache. I've worked with people where their stomach is a very clear indicator of something is wrong, and they've learned to actually use that as the signal for what's coming next to prevent it, rather than experiencing it to then go, oh, well, I didn't really know that was going to happen. It's all valuable stuff. And as we spoke about before, just being as vulnerable as you can with your child at that moment, in those teaching moments, is super important. It's almost like, maybe you can take it back to your own experience when you were at school and exactly the same thing happened to you, and you say, well, what I wish I'd been able to do was this. And the self-compassion angle is really big. And the book is basically, it encourages kids to build a self-compassion superpower. And there are exercises and all sorts of wonderful ways to achieve that. And that language is super important.
Hey, can you share with us one of those those self-compassion exercises?
Sure. Well, let's just for the listeners, let's just break down exactly what self-compassion is. Mm-hmm. So Kristin Neff, who's the leading psychologist on the subject, denotes self-compassion in 3 ways. So there are 3 elements to it. There's self-kindness, where we learn to be warm and understanding to ourselves. There's mindfulness, where we discover how to observe thoughts and feelings as they arise, but not necessarily to engage with them. And then there's common humanity, where we recognize that suffering and imperfection is a part of the human experience. So in terms of examples, well, let's stick with the child and the art project. You would ideally, so there's a great, there are several ways around this, and I'm trying to think of the best one for right now. A lot of perfectionism comes down to self-worth. So if we can actually get the child to tune into what's good rather than what's bad at those perfectionistic moments, that's a really good thing to do it. So a mantra, for example, is a really good way to do it. So you would have the child would recognize, so in the book, for example, Jack is doing an art project and he looks over at somebody else's work and he thinks that somebody else's work is better than his, and he has a perfectionistic episode. Captain Perfection basically teaches him through a mantra. A mantra could be, I love myself, I am enough. I love myself, I am enough. And you say that 10 times in your head, so that actually you're giving yourself more positive language, so that when you actually discover the physical, I'm comparing, because the physicality has actually drawn your attention to that, you then insert the mantra between the feeling and the outcome as it currently stands. Mm-hmm. Another great way is to use mindfulness. So one thing that's really super useful for kids when they're just about to get upset is, outside of, breathing techniques, which again the book goes into, is I really encourage kids just to get back into the present. So the issue with comparison, for example, is that, there's a self-worth issue, but there's also a mine isn't good enough, and what does that mean for the future? So just they're starting to run away with their own thoughts and their own process. Get them back into the now, completely void of that. And how we can achieve that is simply have them look around the room. And again, I use this in the book. Look around the room and get them to identify what they're seeing. So right now I'm seeing 3 books. I'm seeing a piano. I'm seeing some lights. I'm seeing a microphone. Then get them further into that detail. So I'm seeing a piano and it's black and it's on a black stand. I'm seeing some lights and they've got some cables coming out of them. So all of this is keeping them away from where they instinctively want to go, because their upset is driving them there, and is bringing them right back to the present. Those are some good examples.
Yeah. This is really fascinating, and I think it's really important. I think a lot of the things that you're talking about are applicable to lots of kids, and not kids who are just dealing with this perfectionistic behavior. And so I really encourage everybody to check out Captain Perfection and the Secrets of Self-Compassion. Julian Reeve has been our guest tonight. Julian, before we go, tell everybody where they can go to find out more about you and Captain Perfection.
Sure, me on my website, which is julianreeve.com. The Captain Perfection site is captain-perfection.com, and on there you'll find some kind of fun free downloads for your child in terms of developing self-compassion language. There's some swag in there too. And the book's available Amazon, Barnes & Noble now, which is great. We hope to be live with the ebook in Target soon too. So yeah, anywhere, and yes, all of those places online is where to find it.
That's awesome. Julian Reeve, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Jed. Thanks for having me.
Please be sure to join us for the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Our guest will be our friend Lori Orlinsky. She is a 2-time Reading with Your Kids certified great read author. She is going to be joining us again to celebrate Balloons for Tiger. That's the next episode of the podcast. Want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. Of course, want to thank our guest, Julian Reeve. Be sure to check out Captain Perfection and the Secret of Self-Compassion. Also want to thank my team, Alejandra Doherty, Fatima Khan, Hannah Pat Opoyski, Alexia Brown. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. I want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. And as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.